Now for the second class of Azon Overhaul, we're going to be talking about Google Research. This Google Research is actually going to stretch outside of Google itself and even incorporate the actual websites that you are considering for expansion. So basically what we're going to be doing today is learning how to verify whether a website has potential for an expansion, to the point where you're not just going to be guessing at whether all this work you do on your overhaul will actually be successful or not. You would have a pretty clear picture that your effort should be rewarded in the end from all of these checks and different research methods that we're going to be talking about today. Now, this research is not going to be completed all in today's class. We're actually going to be doing some additional research next week in class number 3, where we continue on with Amazon, and we will be researching more things on the Amazon website and also things on our website having to do with our Amazon product ads and our product review pages and things of that nature. This week, though, is all about everything else that is on our website. So we want to find out what kind of potential those areas of our website have. But then we also want to do something that I call a Google love check to make sure that Google actually respects our website. This way, when we do an expansion, we add new content, whether it's to our existing pages or completely new pages for our site, we'll have a lot of confidence that Google will actually pick up these changes quickly and give us new search rankings quickly, or improve our existing search rankings. So again, this helps us to ensure that we don't end up wasting a lot of time with this expansion. So the actual steps that I'm going to be going through for you today is, first I want to talk about each of these different verification steps really briefly, just so you can get an idea of what is going on here. And then we're actually going to dive into it and talk about the Google love checks and website structure, our existing content, and finally, potential for new pages. Now, the first part of this is simply talking about the verification steps. I want to go through you very briefly what these verification steps are that we're going to be talking about in today's class. The first of these is an index check. Now, the first 3 of these actually, I group all of these into what I call the Google love check. So we're going to be doing all 3 of these checks to ensure that Google has respect for our website, that we haven't been penalized, so we don't have anything like that that's going to be holding our website back from being able to achieve either better rankings than it already has and or new rankings, depending on how we decide to proceed with expanding the site. The index check is simply going to find out whether Google has de-indexed our site or not. The penalties are going to check for Google penalties, different things that may have occurred on the site that Google doesn't like, and therefore they may end up dropping your site out of the rankings or significantly lowering the ranking. And then finally, the love check is more about your search engine rankings. Now, the website structure check, we're going to be looking at our live website. And as we go through this stuff, I'm actually going to be doing live demos. This is not all a slideshow presentation today. We're actually going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of it all. So the website structure, we're going to be pulling up our live website and checking to ensure that we have organized our content properly. This can be something that holds back a lot of sites from getting better rankings than they already have. Then we're going to move on to the potential for expansion. We're going to be looking at our existing content very thoroughly, and finally moving on to researching some keywords so we can expand into completely new pages. Now, the first part of this is what I call the Google Love Check. This Google Love Check is a three-step process. First of which we're going to be doing is the index check, and then the penalty check, and finally the love check. In order to do this, we're going to be using either Google itself or various Google services that are available, such as Google Analytics and Google Webmaster Tools, which is now called Google Search Console. Fairly recently had a name change there. So with the Google Index Check, this is pretty straightforward and also really easy to check for. We just want to make sure that Google actually has our site indexed. So all you have to do is type in the word site and a colon, and then whatever your domain name is. So the website that I'm actually going to be expanding and modifying and overhauling throughout the course of this series is Down Comforter Guide. I have actually built this entire website in these live webinars in the past, from Azon Masterclass 1 and also in the Azon Home Study course. So this entire website construction is actually on video from the get-go. Well, I built this back in 2013. I made a minor update to it maybe a year to a year and a half after construction. But for the most part, I really haven't done anything major to this site for 3 years, essentially. So this is a problem because the content that's on my site is likely to be a little stagnant or old by this time. The keywords I might be targeting, the products I might be targeting, they might all be out of date. So that makes this a good candidate for an overhaul. Now, when you do this site search on Google, you simply want to see that results are showing up. In general, this should be about the same number of pages that you have on your actual website. What you do not want to see is 0 results. If I typed in some kind of nonsense domain that wouldn't actually exist, this is what you would see. But if you see this when you're searching for your domain name, especially if you do not have a brand new website, then there's some kind of a problem going on. There's a reason why Google has booted you out of their index. Sometimes you can fix these problems, and other times, even if you can fix it, it might take too much effort to do so. It might just be easier to start over from scratch. Well, the Google Search Console can actually alert us to what these problems are. We're going to be getting to this in just a moment or so here. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, is if you perform this site search and all you're seeing is perhaps the home page of your website, or maybe just a couple of additional pages, but you know that not all of your pages are actually showing up in those results, either that or 0 results should be considered a red flag. You need to investigate those situations more. So I would consider that to be a fail on the Google Index Check. and it requires more investigation to be sure that this is something you can easily clear up. Otherwise, this might be a site that you would need to abandon if for some reason Google had booted it from its index. Now, for my particular site, beyond the fact that I created it a number of years ago originally, there's one other big reason that I use this particular site for this expansion or overhaul that I want to do. Part of the problem actually involves WordPress and the fact that this website ended up getting hacked. There are not 1,360 pages on this site. However, if you actually scroll through the search results, here we go, you can obviously tell what the hacked content is showing up as. Now, none of this content should actually exist anymore on the website itself. However, this kind of stuff does still show up in the Google results until you do something about it to eliminate them. So I want to talk about how you can tell if there's some kind of a problem like this that happens on your own website, how you can be alerted by it, and what you can actually do to go through and get all this fixed. And that is going to be by using the Google Search Console. This was formerly known as Google Webmaster Tools, for those that may have been familiar with it by that name. The Google Search Console gives you a listing of each of the different websites that you have added to that particular Google account. These being all the sites that I have built publicly through these Amazon webinars over the years. Now, when you have a problem that comes up on one of these websites, you're going to see a little message that shows up below the domain name, just like this one. And oftentimes you will have a little link next to it where you can go and see some kind of details relating to that particular error. On this site, you can see that I have an increase in 404 pages. These are pages that don't exist anymore. So what's actually happening here, all of these hacked pages that I went through and eventually cleared up once I figured out what was going on this site, these pages don't exist anymore. So now it's causing all of these 404 errors. So this is a problem that I need to get cleared up on this site. And it's actually pretty easy to clear up these issues a lot of times, as long as it's not something major, to the point where if you are willfully intending to do harm, to try to defraud the Google search results, or if for some reason you willingly loaded some kind of malicious software on your website, essentially like what was done to this website, but not having a hacker involved in it. Those more malicious types of things would be the problems that you'd really be more concerned about, to where it would be a lot easier to abandon the site and move on to the next one. A lot of the other types of issues that could spring up on your site, though, they can be cleared up by simply going through the steps that Google provides for you in this search console. Now, beyond looking at the page that I previously showed you, where you just get this one message, you can sometimes have more than one thing going on with a particular website. And you can find all of your messages beyond just this first one by simply going to all messages over here. And you can see on these sites how it's showing hacked content detected. And it even walks you through the steps that are required to clear this type of thing up as well. So for a large majority of the stuff that will spring up, it's fairly easy to take care of in terms of Google. You simply go through these different steps that they require. Once you are done with it and have cleared up whatever the problem is, what you can actually do is go into one of your websites here, go to search traffic and manual actions, and on this page you will find a little request a review button. As you can see, I still have some of these hacked pages that are showing up on this site that I need to clear up through the Google interface still. So I need to clear these up, and then I can request a review to get all of this cleared out, whatever kind of penalty may exist on this website. As a result of it, I can get all that stuff cleared out by simply requesting these reviews. I've done this type of stuff before. It actually goes through fairly quickly. I want to say the last one that I did, which was in the last couple of months, maybe only took a week or two to actually get this review processed. You just simply level with Google whatever the problem is on the website, especially if it's a problem that was kind of out of your control. You know, hey, I was using WordPress and my site got hacked and they loaded all this junk off of it. I identified how they were getting into my site. I fixed the vulnerability. I removed all of this junk stuff from my website and believe it to be clean now, and wanted to request a review to be reinstated in the search rankings. And it's really that simple. This same type of situation can also apply to pretty much any problem that you're going to experience on Google. They just want to know that you're not trying to pull one over on them or on the people that are actually browsing through their search results and clicking on things. Now, this manual actions page, beyond going into the individual messages, I also find this to be a pretty useful page having to do with anything penalty related. It's usually going to tell you here what needs to be done on your site, and then obviously give you a way that you can go about clearing that up by requesting a review. So I find this to be a pretty important page just on its own, if not simply to find where to request this review at. Now you can also find issues kind of similar to what I've been talking about with a site being hacked, for example. It can show up under security issues. When my entire site was experiencing this issue, I did have it showing up on this page. However, that's not something that I wanted to leave lingering around until this class came about. So I did need to go ahead and clear that stuff up. But Google walks you through all the steps that are required for that type of thing. So it's really not that difficult to figure out. So anytime you have a penalty, you want to look into what's going to be required to get it cleared up, and you want to get that taken care of before you ever decide to do any kind of work on overhauling this particular site. If you can't get it cleared up with Google for some reason, then there's really no purpose in putting a bunch of effort into this site. Now, the one exception to that might be where you have to make changes to your website. If for some reason Google didn't like perhaps the content that you had on your site, or if they thought you were maybe spamming keyword phrases or something and penalized you as a result of it, that would obviously be a situation where you would need to make changes to your website before you could request a review. And so you'll have to kind of leave it up to your own best judgment in those cases as to whether or not you would actually want to attempt making those changes on your website. Google does need to see, good faith on your part that you're actually trying to clear up an issue and that you're not just trying to do the bare minimum to get your site back online and get back into the search rankings as quickly as possible. They're looking for quality here. So as long as you can let them know that you're doing your best to try to achieve that, they will often work with you to get your sites reinstated. Now, the other kind of check that I wanted to talk about is what I call more specifically the Google Love Check. I've kind of referred to the Google Love Check as this broad multi-step method, but then I actually have a process where I'm interested more in direct Google Love in terms of how does Google perceive my website. In a lot of cases, this is basically going to be what kind of search rankings do I have on this website. Now, I'm not necessarily looking for top-notch search rankings that are delivering tons of traffic. In fact, it doesn't even matter if they end up delivering zero traffic. The point here is that you want to be able to find a presence on Google one way or another. If you can't find that presence on Google, it should really leave a doubt in your mind as to whether your future expansions and future content that you might put into this website would actually end up making a difference and getting your site respected. It's a lot easier to go with a site that you know Google already likes, and maybe it's just looking for you to have more of what you already have. Those are the most ideal types of websites to use for these overhauls. Again, it's not a guaranteed game breaker if you can't find a presence in Google, but we will talk about this here in a little more detail. So for my website, again, Down Comforter Guide is what I'm going to be using. On this website, to do a Google Love Check on it, and on any website for that matter, you can really go about this in two different ways. You can manually search for keyword phrases that have to do with your website. This could be things such as the primary keyword that you might be trying to target on a particular page. It could also be long tail or secondary keywords that you're trying to target on those pages. Or it could even be something as specific as the exact title that you're using on a page. For example, we'll go with leaking feathers right here. While my target keyword phrase might be more along the lines of leaking down feathers or leaking down comforters or something of that nature, if for some reason I couldn't find my website in the Google search results using my target keyword phrase, I can instead just search for the entire title of this page. So we'll do a couple different examples here. I'll do this one just searching for the full title of this page. Now, for the current time being, it's possible that doing a manual search on my website may actually make it pretty hard to find the pages that I'm looking for. I don't know for a fact whether Google has restored my site to these search rankings yet or not. But this is again why there are two different methods and why it also is important to understand which one you might need to be using depending on what your situation is. For my site, with the whole hacking issue that I've pointed out to you guys, it may not currently be listed in the search results. The other method, though, is to actually use something more automated. You can really use one of two different Google services for this purpose. You can use the Search Console, where you simply go to Search Analytics, and it will provide you with information here. What I'm really looking for is more of the data on impressions and data on average position as well. Beyond that, though, make sure you're looking at more than just the last month or so worth of data. The last month of data is good to look at, but you may need to look even beyond that to really get a clear picture of what your search rankings really are. If you're using Google Search Console or the other Google service, Google Analytics, to do this, the data that's showing up in here is not guaranteed to be complete. What's happening is when somebody goes to the Google website and they make a search for something, as they go through the search results, for example, I've landed on this page, each of the pages here that are listed are going to receive a count for one page impression. If I were to actually click on one of these results, then it's going to register as a click. However, if I just simply continued on browsing through more search rankings, then each of those different pages that I visit, it's going to be giving impressions to 10 more search rankings that are out there. So with that said, unless somebody actually goes to Google and searches for something and your page pops up somewhere in the search results that they're viewing, it's not going to register any impressions for it. And if it doesn't register any impressions, then it's not going to show up in the Google software. So this should kind of make it a little clearer as far as advantages and disadvantages to using either the manual method where you actually go to Google and perform the search. I recommend going down through about 10 pages worth of the search results to try to find your web page somewhere in there. That can obviously be time consuming, but again, it can find things that may not be showing up in the Google Search Console. Whereas then the Google Search Console, while it's fast, it's going to be lacking some of that data. Now this becomes a lot more clear even beyond the keywords that are maybe not searched for, the keywords that people don't end up browsing far enough through the results to be able to see your listing. Even beyond those, there's more information that can be hidden from you using Google Search Console. And that is made more apparent going over to Google Analytics. If you go over to Google Analytics, as long as you have this connected up with your Search Console account, you'll be able to go to Acquisition, Search Engine Optimization, and Queries, and you will see essentially the same thing that you were seeing before over here in the Search Console. One of the big differences that I find here, though, is that you have this not set. Not set, as you can see from the yellow box above, it's saying any searches that are made with personal or sensitive information, or maybe they're just made a small number of times, they're grouped as this not set. Well, for this particular website, 30%, almost 31% of all of the search engine impressions that it received in the course of this 30-day period were under not set keyword phrases. When you go over to the clicks, it actually accounts for 47% of my total search engine traffic for these unknown keyword phrases. So really the only way to truly discover what those phrases could be would be by doing manual searching on Google. However, the entire point of this is not to identify every single search ranking you possibly have out there. What you're ultimately interested in is what is known as the average position. There's a column for this here, and there's also a column for this over here. This position column is the average position. Well, what this average position really means is that over the course of whatever time span you are looking at, this is the average placement in the search rankings that your listing is showing up in. Well, Google does not necessarily show the same search rankings to everybody. There's a lot of different things that can end up affecting exactly what Google shows to any given person. Being logged into a Google account can also drastically affect the search results that you see. So while you may go to Google and maybe you see your site in the #1 spot or the #5 spot, somebody else could go to Google and do that same exact search and your site might be in a slightly different position. Or sometimes it might not even show up at all. It just kind of depends on whatever Google is using to either put your site in or exclude your site from results for particular people. It can look at where they live, things that they're interested in, their social media friends, things that they've liked. It really gets as deep into it as it possibly can, and as time goes on, this is going to happen even more so. So instead of knowing exactly, yeah, my site has a #1 ranking on this keyword phrase, you end up with an average ranking instead. So the best possible average ranking that you could have would be a 1.0. That would be every single time that result has been displayed, you're the #1 ranking for it. However, achieving a 1.0 on the average position is fairly hard to do, except for really specific keyword phrases that maybe only have to do with your particular website. If you create a fake word, fake brand name or something like that, it's not too difficult to get a #1 rank for that because you might be the only website using that word. However, when you're dealing with normal language, it's pretty difficult to achieve a 1.0. So with that said, what you're really looking for here is not just your average position, say, on a whole for your entire website, but you're looking for opportunities within your search rankings. Obviously, this is something that is really only going to be useful for a website that is successful because you're definitely going to have some search rankings and traffic and data that you can use to go off of. However, even if you don't receive any search engine traffic, I would still highly recommend taking a look at your Search Console and Analytics accounts just to see if any kind of data is available for you. Because while you may not be having any clicks, you might have impressions showing up, and you might have some kind of an average position showing up for various keywords or for various pages on your site. So what you're ultimately looking for here, again, as I said before, is that potential opportunity. There are a number of different ways you can go about finding this with the data that's provided for you here. One of the easiest ways is to look at these three columns kind of together. What I'm ultimately looking for is an average position that is as high as I can possibly find, but not crazy high. We're talking like a number from 11 plus But once you start getting into the 70s and 80s and 90s and hundreds, it becomes a lot more difficult to try to improve those rankings from way back in the pack to getting them somewhere prevalent. However, when you're dealing with, say, a number 11 ranking, you're only one ranking away from busing into that first page. Beyond the average position, though, you also want to look at impressions and clicks, and especially these two numbers combined together, which ends up giving you the click-through ratio, which is over in the right-hand column, in case you don't feel like trying to do rough math in your head. This information tells you how much exposure your search listing is getting, and then it's telling you also how much traffic that listing is bringing you. Well, when you see something like this particular phrase here, where you have a ton of impressions, but you have a very low number of clicks, this is often an opportunity for improvement. The reason why here is because your listing is showing up very frequently, but for one reason or another, it's not getting clicked on that often. Now, I happen to know on this particular page that the reason why this one is not getting clicks is because this ranking is not actually a keyword phrase ranking. It is a image keyword phrase ranking. So this is Google image search showing up these results. Now I want to say they used to have an easy way to filter that out through analytics here, through one of these two buttons here. However, it kind of appears like they have removed that for some reason. I guess that could be one benefit to using the Search Console, is that they do seem to still have that separated over here. Right here where it says search type web, you can also change this to image or video. So for example, if I set this to, it's not going to tell me my keywords. A lot of times if you set this to image though, you'll get the data that you're ultimately looking for, the specific keyword phrases and whether it's web or image search results. Well, for most of the rankings, it's fairly easy to tell. If you're ultimately not sure, you can always go and punch in one of these keywords into Google itself and see where your site actually shows up. Check the normal search and check Google image search, and you can quickly tell which one is going to be which. What you're ultimately interested in is the web searches though. You're looking to make improvement with those web searches, and you're wanting to do that in an area that's going to have the most potential for improvement. So when you have a lot of available impressions and a low amount of clicks, you might need to be making some changes to the title of your page and the description of your page. Think of the things that are showing up in Google. You can actually go and find your page in the Google results and see what is showing up for the title and what is showing up for the description of your listing. Is that information more appealing than the other results? Is it giving people any reason to want to click on it, or is it just something that's easily being overlooked? That can lead you to easy changes that you could be making that could have a pretty major impact on your overall traffic. The other kind of a situation that we're looking for, I had talked about looking for a page that has a higher average position, something where it is at least 11 plus. When you're dealing with those types of search results, where your average position is 11 or worse, so it's going to be a number of 11 or higher. The other data that's being shown to you, the impressions especially, are not truly accurate for what that keyword could offer you. What I mean by that is when somebody goes to Google and they perform a search for something, they very, very rarely go all the way to the bottom and start thumbing through these additional pages like I've been doing. Almost every time, they will pick one of the top 10 results to click on. It's a very low percentage that ends up going beyond page number 1. So when your average position is beyond page number 1, improving that average position to put you on page number 1 can offer a dramatic increase in the number of impressions and also the number of clicks you would end up receiving from that ranking. Oftentimes, narrowly missing the first page like that, if you're somewhere in the average position of numbers 11 through 20, for example, you're on page 2. If you're on page 2, it really will not take too much additional effort to boost that ranking up to a page 1 ranking. Oftentimes, all it takes is going in and adding much more in-depth content to the page than you already have. So, beyond looking for opportunities in low click-through rates on, for example, this page here and this page here, where obviously there's a large number of impressions and very few or zero clicks. I happen to know both of these have to do with image searches though. So for the web results that are here, I'm not actually seeing anything in this first section, so I'm going to need to dive a little bit deeper into this. I'll show my first 100 results. Here we go, Down Comforter Guide, my primary keyword phrase. My primary keyword phrase for this site has an average ranking of 17. I'm getting 394 impressions off of that second page ranking. However, if I could get this increased up to page number 1, then this number of impressions can a lot of times multiply by 10 or sometimes even more than that. So this could be one of my top performing pages. It could be right up here at number 3 or so if I could just bump this ranking up just a little bit beyond what it already is. So this being another reason why I wanted to do a little expansion on this page. The best way to be able to improve the ranking of your homepage would be to expand in your entire website, to add content to it. To the homepage, obviously, can help to improve it, but expanding the rest of your site, adding more pages to your site, making the current pages have more in-depth content, things of that nature is what is going to help to really boost up your homepage ranking. So this would be something that I would want to make a note of to include in my potential overhaul for this website. These are the opportunities that I'm ultimately looking for. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't decide to expand things that are outside of these opportunities, but these should be the ones that you don't want to miss for any reason. I can continue going on down through this list and probably find some more of them. This one with an average ranking of 10, I'm probably showing up on page number 2 for some of these searches. So there may be some improvement that could be done with that particular keyword phrase. And anything else here that I can find that's getting 50 to 100 impressions or more, but my rank is not quite on page number 1 yet. All these, again, would be excellent choices for potential expansion. So as you're going through your research and you find stuff like this, what I would recommend to do is simply to take some notes. So as I'm going through my Google Love Checks, I can make some notes on my website. That way, after I've gone through 2 or 3 different websites of mine, I can easily narrow my list down to one that's going to be the best possible candidate for my overhaul. That way I have the best possible shot at success with it. So I don't end up wasting all that time that I end up putting into this work. For this particular series, and also for my personal research, I'm not going to be researching an additional site. I already know that I'm going after Down Comforter Guide. So ultimately, I don't have as much research to do as the average person would have to. However, I still need all of this important information. Things like the fact that Down Comforter Guide has 394 impressions, and we'll say at 17, average rank of 17 here. So when I make a list of all of these different things, it can not only be used to help me figure out which site has the most potential for the expansion, but then when it comes time to actually plan my expansion and then to carry out that work on it, I'm going to have all this research that I can look back on and make my job a lot easier. So that way I'll know exactly where I want to expand my website, in the areas that I want to expand it, the pages that I want to expand, the keyword phrases that I want to be targeting. I won't be missing any of that kind of stuff. So as you're going through your own research, simply make sure you are taking as many notes as you possibly can. Now, one other thing worth mentioning, for this particular site of mine, obviously this site has had a lot of success in Google. It just recently dropped off the Google charts from this hacking issue that occurred not too long ago. So with that said, I have a lot of data that I could actually look at. Just in this time period that I'm viewing, there's 838 keywords that are showing up, and that's not including the 30% of my search traffic that it's not even telling me what my keywords are. So for a successful website like this one, you would not want to be concerned with listing your average ranking for every single keyword phrase that's out there. That's when it becomes even more important to identify the potential here instead of just having to record everything, because doing this and then these 800 phrases plus then maybe going over to Google and manually searching to try to find some of these ones that are not specified, this would take an enormous amount of time and effort, and ultimately I don't need all of that data. I just need to know what my best opportunities are. So sort by your impressions and look at the most popular stuff first. Then maybe sort by your average position, going from top all the way down. And then you can find the ones that are just beyond the 10.0 mark. So pretty much anything starting here, as long as I could see a decent amount of potential over here for them, they could be good phrases that I would want to expand on and try to improve my rankings with. Sometimes though, you might be deep enough down in the results, let's say right around here or so, where I start getting some that are like 1 impression and 0 clicks. It's possible that some of these keyword phrases may actually end up being good keywords. There could be a lot of traffic behind them. You may then need to go over to the Google Keyword Planner to double check the traffic data behind some of these keywords. But again, if you're dealing with an overwhelming number of keywords like I am on my particular site, it might not really be worth all that effort. Now, beyond looking at the individual keyword phrases, you can also flip over to landing pages here and even see each of your individual pages grouped. And then it will tell you what your impressions are for that page as a whole, for all of the keywords for it. And then it'll tell you your clicks and your average position and so on and so forth. So you can use the same data in the same way, trying to identify those opportunities. For example, this particular page gets a pretty decent amount of impressions, but I'm averaging at number 17. So ultimately, I'm not really getting the full brunt of the traffic that's out there for this particular page. So I might want to mark this particular page for potential expansion and simply add this on to my list, make a different section beyond my keywords that I've done, do the same type of thing that I've done there, but do it now for the pages. This one is 17 again. So I can continue on finding more pages just like this one. All 3 of these could be good potential candidates for an overhaul because they are also showing a decent number of impressions, and they're on page number 3 average. So if I can improve all of these up to page 1, it would certainly boost the exposure and should therefore bring me a lot more traffic as a result. Now you can also look at some of your most popular pages that you have too. Pages that ordinarily you might look at and say, well, that doesn't really look like it needs any improvement. It looks like it's doing just fine to me. For example, my IKEA page here. This one received almost 19,000 impressions and almost 2,000 clicks. The average position of the page is a 7.4, and my click-through rate is almost 10%. So there's certainly no problem here. It's got rankings just fine. It's attracting traffic from those rankings just fine. And on average, I'm on page number 1 for every search term for this page that I rank for. So while it may not seem like there's room for improvement there can still be room for some minor improvement as far as my average position. If I were to increase this 7.4, if I could get this to a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4, the amount of impressions that I'm getting might not change at all. However, the number of clicks that I'm getting would almost certainly increase. The reason why is because when somebody searches on a search engine, they're more likely to click on the top results than they are to scroll down the page and click on the lower down results. So within each group of 10 rankings, you have 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, so on and so forth. Within each group of 10, the higher up in that group you are, to have what would technically be the lowest number. So number 1 being the highest in the 1 through 10 group. That would give you the best potential click-through ratio for those search results. So by simply improving this 7 up to, say, a 3 or a 4, I may easily be able to double the number of clicks that I'm bringing in from the exact same amount of exposure. So that alone could be a really good reason to try to put some improvement into some of your top performing pages, because just a minor amount of improvement, if you can just boost those average rankings up even one spot when you're on page number 1, it can increase your traffic by hundreds or even thousands of monthly visitors. Beyond that though, because this page is performing so good, it also leads me to believe that other highly relational subtopics that I could come up with on that page might also perform equally as well. So expanding the page to still be about the same thing. So on this page, it would still be about IKEA down comforters, but I'm only targeting a couple of IKEA down comforters on that page. If there's more of them out there that I could target, I could get search rankings on those keywords on top of the ones that I already have on this page and potentially increase my traffic even more. It may even increase my average position on my existing rankings by simply having all that extra relational content there. If I look at my individual keyword rankings and look at some of the phrases that are bringing me the most traffic, in fact, all of the top 10 fall into this. Every single one of these, I guess technically it's top 9 because of the not set. Every single one of these here is a keyword phrase that the IKEA page is ranking for. And you can see how many clicks each of these different keywords are delivering and what my average position is for each of these, all these being up in the top 10. But again, there's room for improvement. This 4, if I could get that up to number 1 or 2 or 3, I would certainly get a higher percentage of these 800 impressions. I might be able to get 200 or maybe even 300 clicks just off of this one page if I could boost that ranking up just a little bit beyond what it's already doing. So looking at this and seeing that this specific page is performing this great, by going after other types of IKEA down comforters, this Myceron is one of the models essentially of down comforter that they have in the IKEA brand. So if I go after other ones, I might also be able to easily get search rankings for them, and there might equally be just as much traffic out there available for them. And Google is much more inclined to want to give me those rankings because it already likes this page relating to this particular subject, the IKEA down comforters. So you're looking for potential here on both ends of the spectrum. Your pages that are on the verge of being a really great page, and then also your top performing pages that could use some extra love to perform even better than they're already doing. If you're not dealing with a successful website though, you simply want to verify that you're showing up somewhere. Even if your average rankings are looking like these, where you're like in the 100s, maybe you have a couple of your better ones that are, I don't know, in the high numbers, high 2-digit numbers. It's still some kind of an indication that Google doesn't hate your website. So even in a worst case scenario where you might not be getting any traffic off of these really low performing keyword phrases, it can still give you that bit of a comfort zone to sit in to proceed with doing an overhaul on this website. Maybe you're just not providing enough content to be able to get a good, page 1 or page 2 ranking for that keyword phrase. Maybe there's some kind of other problem going on with your website that needs to be cleared up. Maybe some of your content isn't useful, unique content. Maybe you're only using some unique content. There's all kinds of different aspects like that that could end up dragging down a page ranking, and by simply going through and making some changes and additions to it, you can boost those up and make them perform quite well. So with this final Google Love Check that we've done, verifying our search rankings and also looking for the potential within those existing search rankings, if you happen to completely fail this check, if your site has 0 impressions and 0 clicks across the board, it's not a guaranteed game breaker. Look at everything else. Ask yourself why you're not showing up in the search rankings. You can sometimes even publish a dummy page where you make up a word of your own and you publish it. Give it a couple of weeks and then go and try to search that word on Google. If you still can't show up in the search rankings for that word, there's definitely something wrong on a site-wide basis that would need to have some attention paid to it before ever considering expansion on that site. In most cases, though, as long as you've done a good job of putting your original content together, if it's unique content that you wrote yourself, as long as you haven't used your target keyword phrase every other sentence throughout your entire article, just blatant mistakes such as that, you should have some kind of exposure in Google, whether you're finding it through analytics or whether it requires going to your website and actually trying to search for the titles of individual pages on your site. You should be able to find yourself somewhere in there, or else you need to identify why and fix the problem before trying to proceed. So beyond these Google Love Checks, we can then proceed to check our actual website and to then use Google to help us to verify some of the information that we are finding here. The first part of this that I'm going to be talking about is website structure. For website structure, you basically want to go through and ask yourself a number of questions that I have lined out here for you. Does website structure exist on your site? Do crosslinks maintain or dilute your structure? Is your content grouped together in a highly relational manner? And also, how does Google rank your structuring efforts? So I'm going to talk about these individually in a little more detail here, as well as point out some stuff on my live website. So for the first question of does structure actually exist on my website? What we're really looking to determine here is whether we've organized our website. And this is for the benefit of the people that visit our website, and this is also for the benefit of Google for our search engine rankings. What I mean by website structure and organization, in case you're not already familiar with what I might be talking about, I'm talking about taking all of your individual pages of content. Pages like this, where it's maybe just a plain informational article, or perhaps it is a product review page, to where it's basically the bottom level page that you have on your website. These can't just be thrown on your website, all listed out on one page, because visitors would have to search through them, read through them one by one to really find the content that they're after. Whereas if you can group that content along with other relational content into a number of different categories, then it becomes a lot easier to narrow down that content you want to find. So for example, I land on my home page here. If I wanted to actually learn about specific down comforter products, it would be pretty easy to narrow in on perhaps the buying guide section or maybe on the brand section of my website. And then I might explore some of my subpages for that section. When it comes to a search engine taking a look at your website, it actually works in the same way. When you have your content organized and separated like that, it can find that content to be more relevant. So for example, because I have grouped all of my brand pages together under the brands category, then these pages automatically become more relevant than they would have been just standing on their own, because they're all pages about down comforters. They're all covering a specific down comforter brand. So Google can look at these pages, for example, my IKEA page that's performing so well. And even though I only have the word IKEA here linking this page, it knows that IKEA is a brand of down comforter because that's what my whole website is about. And because I have organized and structured my content properly to have it grouped into relating categories like this. Now, when you're taking a look at your own website, you simply want to note whether or not this stuff exists or not. If you do not have your content organized into different sections, then you're going to have to make some changes to that structure, especially if you plan on expanding the website even more with more new pages. So before you do all this expansion, you need to make sure your current site structure is in order, or else you're just going to have a much larger mess to deal with later on. Now, as far as things that you need to be doing to actually change this structure, and even the other parts that I'm going to be talking about in today's class, talking about your existing content, creating new pages, we're again just in the research phase here. So anytime you run upon something on your website that needs to be changed, or that you decide you want to add to, or a new page that you want to create, or a new keyword you come across, that's what your note-taking is for. So you can then revisit this information later on, plan out your entire expansion, and then finally complete all of that work. That way you end up not missing things as you go along, but you don't have to find one thing and automatically stop and focus on that until you're done with it. You can just make this little list and move along. This also lets you look back at your research, especially if you've researched this for multiple websites, to easily identify which one is going to be your best choice for the overhaul, which one has the most chance at succeeding. While you're looking into these sections, though, consider how you would go about expanding them. If you wanted to add new pages into your website, let's say I had a new buying guide page that I wanted to add in. what would it take from my website to add that in? Would I need to add a new link here? Is that link going to fit properly on my page? For example, here, if I expanded with too many links, it's definitely going to create a lot of white space over here next to those links and down below my image. So I might be a little limited on expansion, at least using this specific design. On my individual category pages, if I look at how I have created that page and ask myself, what would it take to expand this with more content? For this site, it's actually fairly easy. I just have a new section of content like this for each page that I have in it. So if I wanted to add new pages, I could just add new sections of content to this page and simply link up to those new pages on my site. So I think it's important ahead of time to kind of get a general idea of what exactly it's going to take on your part to make all of these different adjustments. So if your site doesn't have a structure at all, you need to be considering how you can organize all of your individual page topics. There may be some of you that are using the default WordPress theme, the default blog style setup where you visit the home page and it's just a listing of each of the different pages that are on your site. And there's nothing more to it than that. You have your home page, you have all of your individual posts, and they're all directly linked from your home page. Those types of websites are the sites that need structure to them. So you need to look at all those individual pages or posts and say, how can I organize these into topics that closely relate with the content that's grouped within them? For example, my brands content only has pages that are specific Down Comforter brands and nothing else. Now, the next question that I want to ask myself is, do my crosslinks maintain or dilute my structure? What I mean by that question is, within the individual pages of your site, these bottom level pages that are grouped within your categories, you can often have text links that are in the content of those pages. What you are looking for is for those pages and those links to reinforce your website structure. I'm looking for an example here that I can point out to you. I don't specifically know of an exact page. Here we go. This page has some links that are pointing off to other pages of my website. So I want to make sure that this is not messing up the structure and the organization that I have on my site. The one exception to that, though, is when it deals with your funnel. A funnel is where traffic enters your website and ultimately where you want that traffic to end up at. On a site like what I build for Amazon, I often have informational content, and then I also have product-based content that's going to have my advertising on it. So if I have traffic entering my site on an informational content page, such as this one, where I don't have any kind of an Amazon ad on this page, I'm then funneling traffic along to a relational product page that will promote a product for me. So this funneling of your traffic to your goal of your website, that is the one exception to your cross-linking. Otherwise, I don't want any of these pages to cross-link to any of these pages, and vice versa. I don't want these pages cross-linking back over to these pages. However, since These pages are the destination of my funnel. It is okay for these pages to link up to these pages. At the very least, with a setup kind of like what I have here, you're at least keeping some kind of separation between these two informational categories. When you're dealing with a much larger website, though, this kind of thing becomes even more so important because you're going to have a lot more pages and you're going to have a lot more potential categories that you might be using to group those pages into. Now, the next question is whether my grouped content highly relates to each other. What I mean by that is looking within any one of my individual categories. Are all of my pages essentially about the same thing? And again, are they about this category? Whatever this category is about, it needs to have a direct relation to what your pages are about. I like using cars as an example, even though I'm not actually a car guy. I'm obviously a computer guy. I think cars are an easy to understand topic for most people, though, because the average person owns a car, drives a car, or at least knows some kind of information about cars. So using cars as an example, let's say I have these 3 different pages on my site. One is going to be about the Dodge Charger, and another one's going to be about the Shelby Mustang GT, and a third one will be about the Pontiac GTO. If I wanted to categorize those 3 pages on my website, I could obviously come up with a wide variety of different ways that I could name that category. I could go super, super vague in general and maybe even a little personal for myself and maybe say something like my favorite cars. That could be the name of my category, like brands is here. Could be called my favorite cars. And those 3 car pages would make complete sense being grouped into that category. However, unless my website visitors actually know me and have any reason to put some kind of a weight into what my personal preferences really are, it's not going to have any meaning to them. When I look at search engines, something like my favorite cars is also not going to have a lot of meaning for that. Sure, there might be some searches out there having to do with favorite cars, but ultimately it's pretty vague. It's not going to be bringing the people to me that I would want to be landing on my page. So I could title that category something much, much better than that. Something like classic American muscle cars or classic American muscle cars of the 60s and 70s. Now, I could be completely wrong. Maybe I think all those are American companies. I don't think I'm mistaken about the American part. Again, I said I'm not exactly a car guy, but you can see how my more specific categories there are much more meaningful for my website visitors, but then it would also be meaningful for a search engine. Something like classic American muscle cars has a much better chance of having search traffic actually out there for it, to where then all of those relational pages that I've grouped into that category help to reinforce that subject. Doing it that way, you can actually get search rankings on these category pages sometimes. For example, this brands page built up and done the right way, I might be able to get a ranking for the search term down comforter brands. by simply detailing all the different brands that I have covered on this site and that produce down comforters. Not only is it important though to potentially bring you rankings for this category page, but by having all this stuff related and grouped together like I have it here, I like to think of this like jelly beans. It's a great example I saw one time on the internet somewhere, and I've liked using that example ever since. The pages that you sort into these categories, I like to think of them like jelly beans. Each of your categories is a different jar, and each of your individual pages is a jelly bean. Well, because these pages are all relational, you could look at them as being a jelly bean of the same color. However, if I had something that wasn't quite the same, that jelly bean would be a different color, which would be content that groups into a different category. So you simply want to keep all the jelly beans of the same color grouped together in their own jars, and you also want to keep that separate as much as you possibly can. That has to do with the cross-links. You don't want your jars intermixing. So now the other question you want to ask yourself is, how does Google rank your structuring? You can go back to your Google Love Check research. If you did individual rankings for, say, your category pages that you already have on your website, you can try to find how does Google rank those particular category pages. Can I go to Google and find this page under the search term down comforter brands? Now, unfortunately, I can't actually do that myself because of the hacking issue, like I had mentioned before. However, I can go into Google Analytics and try to find out some information relating to that. So by searching that in my analytics data, I can find all the keywords that contain that exact phrase, and I can see what my rankings and my average position is going to be for them. So on average, that page ranks between page 3 and page 4. It's not great. It could certainly be a better ranking than that. However, I am getting some kind of exposure from it. This particular phrase has brought me 29 impressions, even though I'm all the way back on page 3. So some improvements to this could easily boost up this ranking for me and expose that page to even more traffic. Beyond that, though, simply seeing that Google has placed this page on an average of page 3 or page 4 for these keywords, it's a good indication to me that Google respects that page. I can then take that a step further and actually look at the pages that are grouped within that category. I pointed out to you before how my IKEA page is the top performing search engine page on this entire website. Well, that IKEA page obviously is grouped into this down comforter brands category. I've proved that the category is well respected, and I obviously also know that some of that individual page content in this category is well respected by Google too. With all of this combined, it's a really good indication to me that there is a lot of potential for expansion here. Now, even though I'm not going to be diving deeper into my product pages this particular class, I'm going to be going into that stuff in the following class in much more detail. For this particular site, I can already tell just from this initial research that these pages are going to be prime pages to either expand, where I could expand any or all of these individual brand pages. I could even expand the overall brand page. I could even add more brands to this particular list. So that would involve the creation of new individual brand pages too. All of these potential expansions would have a lot of opportunity for success because I already have my existing results that I can go off of and have some confidence to know that Google is going to take notice if I make some changes to this site, and I can likely gain some search rankings pretty quickly. Now, for a dead website, I would pay a special attention to your site structure to look for any flaws that might be present, especially if you feel like you've done a good job with writing unique content and maybe things like not overusing your targeted keyword phrases. If you feel like you've done everything within your power and maybe your rankings are present, but they're just not high enough to really bring you a lot of traffic, sometimes it can just be the way you've grouped your content. On a default WordPress site, how I described to you before, just a blog listing where each individual post is listed one after the next. On those types of sites, one post over the next really doesn't have any more significance than the other. So this is what you're really doing here, is creating some importance. You're saying, these are my least important pages, and these are the next most important. And then my overall homepage here brings everything together. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get good rankings on your low-level pages. Obviously, you can see from my IKEA page that's certainly not the case. But grouping all this together, like the jelly bean example that I gave you before, it's a lot easier for Google to rank your website when you have organized it like that, because Google thinks in terms of jars of jelly beans too. Google is not really looking at every single minor detail to your website, especially not when it's throwing it into the search results. It basically has a generalized snapshot of your page content, the common words that are used, how that kind of stuff is used, how it's organized and arranged with each other. And it can quickly determine when it wants to find red jelly beans. It has all the websites with red jelly beans grouped into a jar already, and it can just quickly pick what it needs out of that jar. So by organizing your own content, you're helping Google out by saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and put my content in jars for you to make it easier for you to find my content, and therefore to make it easier for my site visitors to be able to find my content too. A successful website, though, would likely want to focus more on where that potential for expansion is, especially based on your current successes, like I've described with the brand section and the IKEA page of my site. Pay a lot of attention to those areas and focus your expansions there. And that's how you'll get the best results. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is your existing content. Your existing content can be expanded in a wide variety of different ways. The ultimate goal here is to once again verify that there is potential to expand that content so you can actually increase the traffic that you receive on those pages of your website. Now, a lot of what you need to do for the first step here, current keyword rankings and Google Stats, this is essentially the type of research I was showing you for the Google Love Check. So if you had a lot of notes from that part, then there might not be as much to do here. How I was already starting to go through and pick out individual keywords and pages and stuff like that that are going to be good potential targets for my overhaul. That's essentially what you're looking to do here. Using that information though, look at the actual pages of your website and you can ask yourself where improvement can really be had and how can it relate to these keyword choices that I have made. One of the examples that I had for my landing pages, fill power, that had an average position of number 17. If I go and take a look at this page on my live site, I can look at a number of different aspects to this to really determine whether I did a good job the first time around or not. In particular, the first thing that I like to pay attention to is the overall length of my content and ultimately how much depth I went into in that content. Now, the length of my content on this page is not too bad. The depth of my content, at least at a quick glance, also doesn't appear to be too bad. I even get down into talking about specific fill power ratings and what each of these different numbers means, in addition to talking about what I would consider to be more general summary type of information to go along with this subject. So overall, I feel like I did a pretty good job on this original page. What you're really looking for though is the length of your content. If you maybe only wrote about 500 words or something the first time around, especially if that content is fairly vague and general, if it's just a brief summary of what your topic is really about, there's always going to be room for expansion there. If it's a low amount of words though, chances are there are a lot of unexplored subtopics that you might even be able to write about having to do with this exact subject. When you look at how in-depth the content is, you can also kind of figure out whether there's more room for expansion there. And this can also lead to some additional keyword targeting, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. For example, though, if you see that you have a lot of potential in your search rankings for a particular page, and you can also see that that content is pretty short or it's lacking in depth, then just simply doing a brief expansion to this page, adding a couple new sections of content, sort of like what you see here, that might be all it takes to boost this page from an average ranking of 17 up to get it into the top 10. A lot of times it really does not take too much additional effort. You can also identify when you're going through your site like this whether or not you may have used automated content or PLR content or something that could be considered lower quality content and may be dragging down your search results as a result. If you find that stuff on your site, look into the search rankings and how that specific page is performing and really figure out whether that site needs or that content needs to go or whether it can stay. I do have plenty of sites that have some automated content on them, but that automated content is definitely overwhelmed by the unique content that is on those websites. So it's possible that maybe you just need a little bit more unique content to go along with what is already there. It's just going to kind of depend on what you really did for your site the first time around, whether or not you may have taken some shortcuts, especially the first time around. Now, as far as figuring out what to expand existing pages on, what new topics do you really talk about on those pages? One of the things that I like to ask myself is basically, what have I not covered that I need to be covering that is about that subject? If you made a really general article to begin with, this kind of thing will be very, very obvious. Whereas if you did a more in-depth article, something like what I've done, it's going to be a lot less obvious. You may even have to go out there and do some additional research to try to find some of these new subtopics. Personally, I don't really know that much more about fill power or about fill power ratings. Honestly, I had to look up all this information the first time around just to be able to write this article. So while I know that I need to be expanding this page to try to capitalize on that really close search ranking, I don't necessarily know offhand the content that I would want to expand into. So I would certainly want to be marking this one for some future research. Now, I want to explain the whole subtopic thing to you with an example. Again, using cars as a subject like I've done before. Let's say that I have a page on my website about the Ford Mustang. The first time around when I originally wrote it though, maybe I just wrote it out of my head, and maybe I'm not that familiar with cars in general. So it's just going to have a lot of generic information. I like to look at it as like a generic summary, often a couple hundred words in length. That is what ends up being the article on a lot of websites that are out there, especially if you end up creating a whole bunch of websites. In those situations, I just ask myself, what different topics are that directly relate to that subject? So with Mustangs, it's a popular sports car. A lot of people likely customize it for things such as racing. So I could easily have a subtopic on that page about racing with Ford Mustangs. I could have another subtopic about customizing, modding these cars. I could have another section talking about the engines that are in them. I could have yet another one covering stuff like the changes, the evolution of the car over the decades. How is the body style and the mechanics, what's under the hood, how has all that stuff changed from when it was first created up to the modern age? All of these different subtopics, they're pretty easy to identify up front. You can just list them out individually for your research. You don't have to actually go through and expand on those topics right away. But then when it comes time to write your article, to add some new content to these pages, I could just go into this page and make a listing of my headers like I've done right here and right here. I could just simply put these down at the bottom of my page and write in a few paragraphs of content in between each of those header sections. This makes it really easy to expand my website. It also does a lot of things that you may not even consciously think about right away, where using that Mustang example and having a section about racing and a section about customizing and a section about engines and a section about evolution, those general subtopics are almost guaranteed to have search traffic for them, having to do with the Mustang. However, when I then go into even more detail about each of those subtopics and write a couple of paragraphs worth of information, chances are I'm going to end up using a wider variety of different kinds of keywords that all come back to relate to my original subject. And this again is going to enforce the search engine power, how relevant that page is for my various keyword phrases. So on this particular page of my site, I'm certainly going to have to do a little bit more investigating. Since I got into a lot of detail about the ratings, I'd probably try to find some more detail about fill types, maybe about the different materials that are used in these fills. And I could go out and make a listing of these different materials, and I could have a little subsection on this page about each one of them where I go into more detail, write a paragraph or two about each. And then overall, I've ended up adding 200 to 500 new words to this page, all of highly relational content, and it's likely going to end up covering all these different words that I do not now have on this particular page. So that's the idea here behind your subtopic expansion. And it's really pretty straightforward, simply browsing through your web page and identifying the areas where you're lacking information, where you could make your page more useful for your website visitors. What else can you teach them about that subject? That's the kind of content you're expanding with. Now, often this kind of content may have search traffic that actually backs it up. We can go over to the Google Keyword Planner to try to find some of these types of keywords where maybe I simply search for things like downfill or downfill power or fill power ratings or fill power materials. I punch these into the Google Keyword Planner to try to find some new keyword phrases relating to my topic. Sometimes you'll be able to find the information you're looking for pretty easily with new keyword phrases here. Other times, though, you might find that no matter what you search, you end up with the same general listing of keywords in the keyword tool. There are certainly other places that you can go to try to find these subtopics or long tail keyword phrases. One example is to simply start typing your keyword into Google. You have Google Instant Search here, unless you have disabled this under your Google account settings. You should have these suggestions that show up for you. These could be potential long tail keyword phrases and potential subtopics that I might want to cover on this page. I have a chart already. I could do a comparison about some of those different fill powers. I could talk about temperature for them. Even beyond that original suggestion, though, I could still likely find even more. If you type a space after your keyword phrase, it eliminates the keyword phrase itself as a possibility. You can even continue on by typing, say, a letter, like the letter C, and it's going to show me some suggestions that I'll start with the letter C. So I could actually go through one letter at a time and find all of these different possibilities that I could use for long tail keyword phrases to go along with my original subject. You can sometimes also get these similar long-tail types of suggestions down at the bottom of a search that you have performed on Google too. All these different methods can be used to help find extra keywords for your site, to help find long-tail keyword phrases that you might just be simply mentioning somewhere throughout your article. It might just be thrown into the middle of a paragraph somewhere that it makes sense. Other times, a long-tail keyword phrase could be an entire subtopic that you then expand on with a couple of paragraphs worth of information. It really just depends on what the keyword is about and how much information you might be able to provide for that. Now, even though a lot of the long tail keyword phrases can end up working as a subtopic, it certainly doesn't have to be a subtopic. How I mentioned, it can just go in the content of your page simply somewhere that it makes sense to be. Things like that are quite okay too. Just look at your keywords one by one and ask yourself what is really going to be best to use this with. Is there a lot of information I can really tell people about this? Or is it more of like a one sentence kind of a thing? Now, beyond looking at your actual text content that's on your pages, you should also pay attention to any media that you have, or perhaps a lack of media, if that may be the case. What I mean by that is media can be anything other than text, basically. Images, it could be videos, it could be music, it could even be a game, or just some kind of interactive activity on your website that has to do with whatever your page topic is about. Ultimately, the more text content you have on a page, the more media you should have to go along with it. So if I continued expanding on this particular page and had a big section of new content like this large, I would make sure that I had at least one new image that I could add along in with it. Now, if you currently do not have media in your pages, or maybe you just don't have a lot. Maybe you only have one image on a page, but then you have a huge page full of text. Look for those type of situations. Mark them down as areas to change or expand on in your website. Simply having a decent amount of media to go along with your text can not only make your site more useful for the people that are reading it, but it can also actually help your search rankings too, where you have URLs of these images. And this one, for example, is named downfeathered.jpg. You can also have alt text on the images. The alt text is the text that would show up in place of that image if for some reason the image didn't load. People can disable images in their browser, for example, and they'll see the alt text instead. Well, Google looks at that kind of stuff. The alt text, the name of the image, the content that's nearby the image, and they will use that when ranking the image. You can get traffic directly from Google image search, or the images can simply help to reinforce what your page is actually about. It really benefits you from a number of different angles that way. Now, any new media that you decide to add, if it is completely original, it's going to be the best. This is going to give you the best benefit on your site. However, even reused media that is 100% not original, like such as these images here. Not my images. These came off of other websites that are out there, maybe even off of Wikipedia. While it may not give me the best possible benefit as if these were unique images, it's still going to be better than nothing. And it's not going to harm my search rankings to be reusing these images. So if you don't have them already, make some plans to add some in there. If you're going to be expanding content or adding new content to your site, also plan appropriately and make sure you're going to have media for all that new content. Now, the last thing that I really want to go into detail about in today's class is the potential for new pages on your site. In a fairly similar manner to what we've already been doing, looking for keyword potential, looking for new topics that we can discuss on our website, we can do the same kind of thing to create completely new pages and even new sections of content on our site. However, as I mentioned in the previous class, and it's something that I will yet again stress now, you have to make sure that any new page topics that you decide to add to your site, that they're not going to dilute your niche. You need it to reinforce your niche, to get more in-depth about it. Like I was describing to you in some of my other examples, the Ford Mustang example, if your entire website was about Ford Mustangs, you would not want to expand your website with general car articles or any kind of topic that got into dealing with other types of cars outside of the Ford Mustang. Any of that kind of content is going to dilute your original niche, and it can harm your original search rankings. Even if you didn't have the rankings to begin with, it can make it a lot more difficult to try to achieve new rankings, because then your site has to be relevant in Google's eyes for everything about cars instead of just Ford Mustangs, using that previous example. So we're again essentially dealing with jelly beans here. The Ford Mustang is one very specific color of jelly bean. Whereas in the jar full of cars, you would have a ton of different kinds of jelly beans, and you would kind of get lost in the jumble unless you had information about all of them. So with that said, when you're expanding and considering new page topics, there are a couple of different ways you can go about adding this content into your website. The first one is to use your current categories, your sub-niches that you're already targeting. You can also decide to create completely brand new categories on your site. So I want to talk about these two different kinds of content and what exactly it's going to mean for your expansion and how these expansions can vary. And then we're going to talk about topic discovery, using keywords to find these new topics, kind of like what we did with our existing page subtopics not too long ago. And we're also going to be potentially using current events for this type of expansion. So to start with, I want to discuss current sub-niche expansion. What I'm referring to here is looking at one of your existing main categories on your site, one of these big sections here. Are there any new pages that you could add to one of these sections? On top of that, though, you need to make sure that new content that you're adding directly relates to that category. So for example, I could certainly try to expand a down comforter site with relational kinds of products, duvets, pillows, other things of that nature, sheets. However, that's not really what my website is about. My website is about down comforters. So I would not only be diluting my niche that way, but I would likely end up diluting whatever category I put those new pages into, because pages about duvets or duvet brands and pillows and sheets and stuff like that, they're not down comforter brands. They're not going to fit in with this category. And so if I loaded this category up with a bunch of new pages like that, I could harm the good rankings that are currently here for these pages. So I would only want to expand this brand section with more brands of down comforters. I would only want to expand this section with more consumer concerns of down comforters, so on and so forth. If you find a new topic, though, that you want to add to your site, and it's not something that you can group into one of these categories, then you have to consider whether you're willing to create a brand new category on your site. However, creating a brand new category becomes a lot more difficult. Early on in today's class, I mentioned how when you're going through your structure, you would want to look at your category pages and ask, what exactly would it take to create a new page in, say, this category? I might need a new link right here, and I would need a new section of content to go on this page to link up to my new page. So with expanding an existing category with a new page, it's fairly easy and straightforward. A couple of simple additions. When you're dealing with a completely new category on your site, though, if I wanted to add a whole new section of informational articles because maybe it didn't relate to these two topics, where is that going to go on my site? Where am I going to put that on my homepage? Where am I going to link up to it in the top of my site? And we're also just talking about the basic output for it, like what you see here, a link to my category page, a picture for it, some standard information about that category, and sometimes even links to some of those category pages. On top of that, though, simply having to make room for all that and adding that new content to your site, then you also have the category page itself to worry about. You have potentially another article that's going to have to be created for that category page on top of the unique content that you're creating for this subsection, and then on top of the completely brand new page that you decide to create. So as you can see, going with a brand new topic, a brand new category for your site will definitely result in more work than it would be if you simply added pages to your existing sections of your website. So make sure you consider that when you are considering new topics that you're going to be adding on. Ask if it's going to be worth adding that new topic. Figure out how many pages you would even have to group into that new topic or new category. You would not want to create a brand new category of pages on your site and just have one or two posts grouped within it. I like to go for at least 5 at a minimum, just to make there a real point to having that category even exist. Otherwise, I would consider whether it's really worth including on my site, or maybe try to find some additional topics that I could add to that category that would still relate. Now that you know the two different ways you can kind of go about adding new pages to the site, you can actually go on with some research to help you come up with these topics for these new pages. Just like you may have done to originally create your website, you're certainly welcome to use maybe some of your original website research if you had some topics left over that you never utilized. There's certainly nothing wrong with trying to pull that stuff back out and use it now. You can also do traditional keyword research to try to find some more keyword phrases, searching for, like I showed you before, down comforter, for example, in the Google Keyword Planner. I can easily come up with a wide variety of different keywords that relate to my topic. And some of these I might then be able to turn into completely new page topics. However, that's not the only way that you can really go about finding these new topics. And you're likely already familiar with doing it in this manner. So I didn't want to be focusing on this too much in this class. Instead, I wanted to give you some more unique ideas for finding some of these new topics. One of those I actually showed you already. That is the Google Instant Search, where you simply go on Google and you start typing in one of your keyword phrases relating to your niche, and it will continue providing more and more suggestions for you depending on whatever you have typed. Well, for the word down, I can easily find what some of the most commonly searched for things there are. I can get a little closer to what my niche is about, and I can find the most common things here. I can even go one letter at a time and see perhaps what people are searching for. You can even go a step beyond that, and you can do 2 letters at a time, starting with, A through Z for the first letter, A through Z for the second letter, so on and so forth. You can really get an almost endless amount of suggestions using this particular trick. One of the other things that I like to do is to use some kind of a keyword density tool. If you take a page topic or a keyword topic and you search for it on Google, and then you find one of the more popular pages, say one of the top ranking pages on Google for that phrase, this page is obviously going to contain relational content to my website. So the question is, what is this page writing about? What kind of content does it have? Is it something that I can quickly take a look at and figure all that out for myself without having to spend forever reading through this actual page? One method I like to use is the keyword density method, to simply take some of these top ranking pages and to use a keyword density checker to find out what the most common words are and how often they might be used. So I can simply pop my URL in on this page here and search for it, and it's going to take a look at that page on that website and find the most commonly used words from it. A lot of these might not make any sense whatsoever. They might not be meaningful, especially in terms of trying to find new site topics. However, other ones will be very meaningful. You really have to know a little bit about your niche to truly be able to look through a list like this and to tell what's useful to you and what is not. Pretty obvious stuff like add to cart. This is just generic text that is found in the content here. It's going to have certain words like rewards and earn and sale that are going to be repeated over and over again throughout this content. So these are obviously going to be some of my most popular words that are on here. You can see reviews and rewards showing up right here. While other things, comforter obviously is one of the most frequently used words. White down comforter, yet again, one of the most frequently used phrases. Beyond that though, things like goose down comforter sale, white goose down, oversized thread count, hotel grand oversized, down blend comforter, Siberian white down. These could easily be other topics that I could cover on new pages of my website. They could also end up being subtopics that I could end up covering on the existing pages of my site if I simply wanted to expand on those pages even more. Now, personally, on my particular website, the large majority of the overhaul work that I actually want to do to this website really exists in my brands section. I've explored a lot of the keyword phrases having to do with this site a number of times in the past. Even looking through some of the other techniques that I've just shown you, checking some keyword densities and things like that, there's maybe only a couple of new topics that I was able to come up with that really stood out as being decent topics. And even then, a large majority of those topics would likely just be new subtopics for my existing pages. For example, on this previous page here, where we had white down comforters, white goose down, Siberian white down, things of that nature, those could easily be new subtopics that I add onto my fill power page, for example, where I talk about the different fill materials that are used in these down comforters. So don't just take every keyword that you see and automatically say, I'm going to make a new page with this. Ask how it would really fit best into your site, whether it's going to be worthwhile pursuing adding it into your site also. You can do things like take your keywords back over to the Google Keyword Planner and verify that there is indeed some traffic for those phrases. In general, I try not to put too much emphasis on keyword traffic and keyword competition when I'm doing my expansion, as long as I know that I'm expanding my site in a way that's going to make my website even more relational and in-depth than it already is. I should get some benefits from it overall. I should be able to improve a lot of my existing search rankings from it overall. Because of my verifications with my Google Love checks, I should also be able to at least achieve some new rankings with some of that new content that I add, whether it's new subtopics on existing pages or brand new pages that I decide to build onto that website. Ultimately, though, of all these different ways that you can go about expanding your site, you can make changes to stuff that's already there. You can add new content to your existing pages. You can add brand new pages to your site. You can even add brand new sections of pages to your site. Ultimately, though, you don't have to be doing all of them with an overhaul. You don't need to find potential for expansion in all those different areas when you're doing your research. However, what you are looking for is potential for expansion in at least some area of your website. You need to have a good reason to expand it, to actually expand it. You shouldn't just do this blindly. So if I can't find existing pages that I want to change or modify and I can't find maybe new informational articles that I want to add on to my site, but maybe I could find some new Amazon products that I wanted to add on to my site. Maybe some existing Amazon products on my site might need to be changed around a little bit. Those types of things, even though it's just one section of my site, definitely qualifies and makes a good candidate for being an overhaul, especially if you have good reasons to justify that kind of a change. Now, one of the final types of expansions that you could do, at least as far as a place to get ideas for topics for those expansions, is something that I did mention in the previous class, but I still wanted to mention at least here one more time very briefly, and that is to use current events, things that are popular in the media, in news, on TV shows, movies, whatever is out there for mass consumption that's getting a lot of attention. If something having to do with your niche, directly having to do with your niche, I should say, you don't want stuff that's going to dilute your niche again. You need stuff that directly relates to your niche. If you see anything like that in the media, though, as quick as possible, you would want to plan an overhaul on your site to add new content to target that type of stuff. As far as the actual keywords that you would go about using on those new sections of content, you're really going to have to guess at them, though. Just make an educated guess at whatever the topic is, whatever your niche is, whatever the media type was that you saw it on. Like if you saw it on a particular TV show, talk about that TV show by name, talk about the network that it came on, talk about the people that were involved, give as much information as you possibly can, and you're more likely to hit those different keywords that people search for having to do with it. The only difference with this current event expansion with all the other types of expansion, though, is that you can't really plan the current event expansion. You could go back in the past and try to find things like this that relate to your niche that you could put on your site. However, you're not going to get as much of a benefit from it as you would if it's a brand new event, something that's happening right now in the news, because people will be very actively searching for the stuff that's right now in popular media. On top of that, though, the search engine traffic for those topics is not going to be easily researched, or at least not at realistic levels. What I mean by that is if a new kind of product, or say a new company that's making a certain kind of product, they start being talked about in the news. Before that, maybe nobody had ever heard of them before, and now all of a sudden they're being talked about on every major news network in the USA. They would definitely start to get a lot of instantaneous exposure. There'd be a lot of keyword searches relating to them and their products and the things that they do, and yet you could go to the Google Keyword Planner for even a month, maybe even 2 months after that stuff started happening, before you would actually be able to get any kind of traffic data for specific keywords. So that is why you have to take a guess at what the keywords are going to be for those types of topics. But if you can get on them early enough, as soon as that stuff is happening, and be among the first people to get content published out there for it, especially if it's not something that's happening on the internet. Like if you're reading a news story off of Google News, chances are it's already popular to be showing up there. And obviously other websites already have stories out there about it. Whereas if you're just watching your favorite TV show and you see them using one of the products in your niche or something like that, that would be a better example people might wonder about that product or what it is, where they can get it from. The best example that I like to use, I've used this one for years. I mentioned this in the previous class. I'll mention it one final time here before I move on from this topic, is Steven Tyler and American Idol and hair feather clips. On that show, Steven Tyler was brought on as one of the judges. Steven Tyler obviously being the lead singer of Aerosmith. He kind of already had his own following before that, before American Idol, very obviously from Aerosmith. And so when he came on the show, people kind of paid attention to his style. He was very different from the other judges, very, outgoing and flamboyant. And one of the things that was noticeable about him was that he had these feathers in his hair that were clipped in or woven into his hair even. And as soon as he made his first appearance on American Idol as a judge wearing those hair feather clips, those things were selling like hotcakes as soon as the next morning. If you had a site about hair feather clips, though, the day before that first American Idol episode ran, where he was wearing them, chances are the competition for that product and for keywords relating to it was very, very low. And the traffic that was out there for it was very, very low. The new thing comes along, though, and makes it really popular. Something propels it, and all of a sudden you have not only much more keyword traffic on the niche itself and the product keywords, but then you also have brand new keyword phrases that are created. Things having to do with hair feather clips and American Idol and Steven Tyler would be the three most key parts to those brand new keyword phrases that came out. So this should kind of be setting off bells in your head as far as how you can accomplish the same type of thing, but with a different niche, using a different example of a current event. You just have to simply see it right as it's happening, essentially, and act as quickly as you possibly can to get that content put out on your site. Now, to get you prepared for the next class of Azon Overhaul, there's not additional work that you have to do. What you want to do is take each of your sites that you are considering for an overhaul. If you remember at the end of the last class, I recommended to try to prepare 1 to 3 sites that you could use for your research. Now you want to take those 1 to 3 sites and go through the research steps that I have taught you in today's class. First, verify Google Love for your site. This would be indexing, penalty checking, and then the actual search rankings. And then explore what kind of expansion potential there is for your website using information on your website, what you can plainly see with your eyes, and also information that you may be researching off of Google. Ultimately, everything that you're doing here for this research, so try to take as many notes as you can. All the pages that you're looking at, changes that you're considering making, keywords that you're finding, potential new topics or subtopics that you might want to add to your site. Anything having to do with a change or an addition that might happen to the site, or stats directly related to one of those changes, the stats that I've specifically been mentioning to you tonight. All that kind of stuff is the most important information that you would want to be recording as you proceed through your research. So you want to get all that research done for those 1 to 3 websites, and then bring that research along to the next class. We will be expanding on that research even more by continuing on with Amazon to finish the research for all of the product related things that are on that website. Let's see, our first question here, Kelly is asking, I have some old Blogspot and Google page sites that I haven't seen or used in years. Is it okay to just delete them? Kelly, it could really just kind of depend on what those pages are. I'd certainly go back and take a look at them before deciding to delete them. If there are any kind of existing search rankings that they may have, they could certainly be useful for you, even if it was nothing else but to perhaps direct traffic back to another website of yours. They could certainly be useful, especially since they're not one of your properties. It sounds like you mentioned Blogspot, like it might just be free blogging properties. There's not going to really be any harm, I guess, to leaving stuff like that up, even if it was a really poor quality and not doing anything. So you might not even have to bother with deleting them either way, really. And let's see, Tina. Hi, Tina. Good to see you again tonight. Tina's asking 2 questions. Number 1, how do you deal with multiple websites for analytics and search console, etc.? And number 2, am I using the same account for all of them? You can actually do that really either way, just depending on whatever works best for you or what you prefer. I do have multiple Google accounts. However, I also do have some accounts where I have multiple sites all put on to the same account. So like, for example, on this particular Google account, both in Search Console and also on Google Analytics, I load up all the Amazon sites on this account that I've publicly shared, sites that I have done training lessons on over the years, sites that I have built on, maybe originally in the middle of a live webinar series or something like that. These would be the sites that I have listed on this particular Google account, because all of these end up getting shared. I usually have my content stolen from these sites. As you can see from even the problems that I've described to you earlier today on my Down Comforter site, it actually occurred with all 3 of these sites that I've publicly shared. All 3 of them were hacked. I think people just do it to try to make a point, because I tell them I haven't had a site hacked in years, and then boom, a week later, 3 of my sites that I've publicly shared get hacked. You know, there's reasons like that why I need to keep my properties separate. I can't share my entire portfolio of Amazon websites with my customers, unfortunately, because they'd all get ripped off or targeted in some way, form, or fashion, simply because I share them with so many people from all over the world. If you don't have something like that, a really good reason why you need to hide some of your websites, essentially, then it really doesn't make that much of a difference whether you include everything in one single account or whether you set up separate accounts for each individual website that you do. Adding on your properties is fairly straightforward and easy. For example, with Google Search Console, all I had to do to add a new one on is just click on the Add a Property button. And then I just simply add in the verification code for each. When Google penalizes one of my websites, for example, it won't automatically penalize all the other ones on my account or anything like that. Google would really have to have a really good reason to do something like that, in my opinion. They'd have to see that you're blatantly trying to deceive or cheat Google somehow with, say, the content on one of your websites, and then they just might kind of lose respect for you as a website developer in general and penalize all of your properties that are on your account. However, I've never heard of a single instance of that happening from any of the people that I teach with the way that I recommend for sites to be built, because obviously I am putting a big focus on quality of the content, giving people what they're actually trying to search for in the search engines, helping Google essentially to try to complete their mission statement through my website, at least for the keywords that I'm trying to target. So I don't see any downside to grouping them all together. The only downside, beyond if you had something like my circumstance where I can't publicly share all of my properties because I'm doing videos and things like that with them, unless it's something like that, the only reason why you would really ever need to consider splitting them up is if you think you might try to sell one of your websites in the future. It can certainly be easiest to just have everything on completely separate accounts and to just be able to say, once you've sold a website, okay, hey, here's this Google account. It has, the Search Console and analytics and everything all connected up to it. But ultimately, you don't have to sell your accounts along with your websites. Google Analytics properties can be transferred from one Google account to another. So there's still really not a reason there why you would have to keep them separate, even if you had them all grouped together. I've been in this situation before where one of my sites was one of many that I had on a particular Google account of mine, and I wanted to sell that particular website. And, I was able to pull it off of there just fine and get that transferred over to the new owner. Certain accounts, though, that you might not be able to transfer over, they don't expect those things to come along with it. So they don't expect you to really give them your own Google account. The other thing that can maybe complicate trying to use a separate Google account for each separate website is that Google will limit you on how many accounts you can really run. They'll have these verification steps where you need a phone number to provide so they can send you a text message to verify your account with. So ultimately, you might be able to open a handful of accounts that way, but you're not going to be able to really continuously expand into new websites, opening new accounts all the time like that. So another reason why I recommend to just put them all on one account, or to make a small collection of accounts, more similar to like what I've done. I have a couple of accounts just in my name, and then I also have some accounts that my wife uses in her name, a lot of which, though, are often accessed on the same computer. And I've never experienced any kind of problems with using multiple accounts or anything of that nature with Google. So Yeah, Tina, I was just reading through your next question here. You're quite welcome for the previous answers. And what you're mentioning about my plugin, that actually will occur with, I can't say every single one of my plugins, because a lot of them have been modified to get rid of this. I'll repeat your question here. She says, I have a site my plugins are installed on but never activated, and you just installed WordFence. Yeah, I know, it flags them all. It actually is flagging them all. Okay, it might not even be worth me trying to bother with them. At one point in time, WordFence flagged all of my plugins. Um, what WordFence doesn't like, WordFence is a security plugin for those of you that may not know. What WordFence doesn't like about my plugins is that I have them encrypted. I have them encrypted, unfortunately, to protect against software pirates. Unfortunately, my very first plugin that I ever released was almost immediately copied and pirated and redistributed, and so I kind of had to learn my lesson the hard way that time. And so ever since then, I release all my plugins encrypted. I don't have any malicious code in my plugins. However, my method of encryption could essentially be used to hide malicious code. I'd be shooting myself in the foot if I put malicious code in commercial plugins. Obviously, a business like that would not last for very long. So it's not something that, you would need to worry about in terms of there being anything wrong with the plugins. There's definitely not any kind of harmful or malicious code in them. It's really more of like a false positive situation where my encryption could be used by, somebody else. If they were to create a plugin, they could create a plugin that didn't do what it said it was supposed to do, and instead had all this other code in it that did malicious stuff. Maybe it tried to take over your web server or something like that. And ultimately, it can't really tell whether my plugin has malicious code in it or not because it's encrypted. It can't see the code of my plugin. So once upon a time, I've heard that from quite a few people over the years that WordFence flags all of my plugins. And I got a hold of a copy of WordFence and analyzed the code of WordFence to figure out what exactly it was detecting from my plugins that it didn't like. Was it just the use of encrypted code, or was it the way that I went about using it? And it was the particular arrangement of my encrypted code that it didn't seem to like, where it was saying it could commonly be used to, hide things like malicious code or something like that. So I changed the way that it worked and republished. I don't believe I ever got all of my plugins completed with that new coding to deal with the WordFence issue. However, you mentioned that it's showing up on all of them, and the one specific one that you mentioned, Azon Exit Cache, that's my most recent plugin. That one definitely has my new coding in it. So it appears as though, I don't know, somebody else that is using malicious code, I guess, may have found a way around that, and they had to do something else about it. So I'll have to try to look into it, see if I can correct that or not. Short of getting rid of the encryption on my code and essentially just letting my code be out there for free, might be the only way that I can ever completely solve that issue. However, I can guarantee on the name of my business that there's nothing harmful or malicious in any of my plugins. And in my opinion, that would just be a horrible, horrible business idea for someone to sell commercial plugins and to to have something like that in it. Yeah, it'll flag every .php file from every one of my plugins because the PHP files are encrypted. If you try to open one of those PHP files in a notepad, for example, it looks like gibberish, and that's the encoding. Whereas the JavaScript files in my plugins, I do not encode those. There's not an easy way to go about encoding them, really. But I can at least guarantee that there's nothing, malicious or harmful about any of my plugins, and may or may not be able to do something about them once again being flagged under WordFence. But I do appreciate you bringing that to my attention, if nothing else. Certainly good to let my support know in case those types of things start coming to my support system again, so they can start handling that the way that it used to be handled before I was able to make those changes. Okay, yeah, that's not a problem. For how to proceed, just keep using them as normal. WordFence will, flag them. However, it shouldn't prevent them from running or anything, and it won't affect you by having them there. So basically, just ignore what WordFence tells you is the simplest explanation for that. Just to summarize my 10-minute explanation into one sentence. You're welcome.